Director for the Cybersecurity Program, and welcome to the first video lecture workshop on the Security Foundations class that began yesterday, 6/25. Welcome to the program. This first course is an intro overview course of a lot of really important concepts that you'll need to keep in mind as you go throughout the program, and for that matter, pretty much throughout your career. There's a lot of foundational concepts in this whole class that you'll just keep coming back to. You'll keep thinking about some of these theories, and you'll be facing some of the things we cover, like I said, pretty much throughout your career. The way that these video lectures and workshops work is I try to cover the highlights of the material, just kind of quickly go over the lessons in each video workshop. We have one, of course, for each week, so generally cover about 5 units. This course is mainly conceptual. We're going to tweak that a little bit going forward, balance out some stuff, I think, between classes 1 and 2, but this is the Mach 1 version of the courseware, and so you'll be having this course as a kind of a relatively easy starting point, and then we'll get you diving in hands-on in the next class, in our Network Foundations class. In this class, we cover a whole bunch of different, like I said, concepts, and so for this first, and just to finish about the lectures in general, is in the throughout the rest of the courses, this one won't really have as many demos per se because it's more of a conceptual, so more of a lecture-based class. But the rest of them will have demos on different things as we move through. Some of the classes are very, of course, hands-on intensive, so the lectures will become less lecture and more demo. But that's kind of the way we do it, and we try to cover the first half of the units, give or take, depending upon the structure of the course and the weighting, and then to cover the last half in the following week. So, so to this week, we're going to cover the first half, first 5 lessons, and so that's Introduction to Security Foundations, Security Roles, Attacks and Threat Actors, Information Security, which is sort of one of that and organizational security kind of bring all this together for us, but we'll come back to that. And then we'll talk about defense basics, some very important concepts. So what do we start out with in this program here? Well, we start off with, some talk about what is information security, like what is security. It goes back to the Latin in the lesson. But when you really boil it down, what we're attempting to do in cybersecurity or information security is we are attempting to protect the organizational assets and intellectual information. So usually when you get down to it, what we usually do is say we're trying to protect at the core the information, the proprietary confidential information of an organization, whatever that is. If that's a software company, obviously their proprietary source code for their next game or next app. All companies have proprietary information, customer list, employee list, secret sauce, marketing plans, various and sundry things. And of course, depending on the organization and the type of organization, they may have even more secret sauce. Obviously a mom and pop corner store, would have some, information that would be needing to be protected, their own proprietary information, their own personal finance information, their employees. They might have information on their company, their customers, but many times they don't. Not that they're maintaining, it's just a transaction. But of course, as we know from some of the breaches over the last few years, that they're still potentially a target because maybe a credit card skimmer or something, right? So every organization has some potential, information and assets that they need to protect. But it's ultimately the information and then the assets come into play because we have to protect all those network devices and the network and the servers and the databases and the backups and stuff in the cloud and everywhere, because they are going to be what we use to manipulate and work with that confidential information. So it's really about protecting the information of the organization, and then of course we layer onto that the equipment we have to protect because it processes and stores and transmits that information. There are a couple really important concepts in that first chapter or lesson. One of them is something called the CIA triad. Now, that's not the Central Intelligence Agency. It stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so what this is the way I like to think of it is it's really the promise we make the organization we work for. or broadly what cybersecurity promises to organizations is we are going to do these things. We're going to protect the confidentiality of any of our information and organizational assets. We're going to protect the integrity. Confidentiality is pretty straightforward. We want to keep it secret. Integrity, what do we mean by that? Well, we don't want it to be changed in a way that's unknown or untraceable. Obviously, if somebody gets some money in and they have to update the accounting records through the accounting software, an appropriate accounting person, and that's all logged in and traced and documentable, then yes, then it's going to balance, right? And we're going to have our account go up in our accounting software. We're going to deposit some money, and so it's all going to work. So that kind of normal operation we want to happen. But what we don't want to happen is somebody to get in and maliciously or accidentally change the data in a way that we didn't expect, right? We don't want somebody to wipe out all of our balances, delete all of our customers, steal all of our customer data. So the integrity part is about maintaining the integrity, the static state of that data, except with approved changes. Obviously, data has to change. Developers are changing source code. People are changing financial records. Employees are being hired and fired. You're getting new customers. So we're constantly, having that data update. But we want it to happen only in approved mechanisms. We want it to happen in ways that we can audit and trace back, and we know what's going on. And so our job is to allow that, but to protect the integrity of the data so that the things don't get changed in an improper way. And then the last one is actually the one that sometimes gets a little neglected in our field, and that's the availability. We kind of get the, confidentiality, got to protect that data. Let's encrypt it. Let's lock it down. Let's put 17 passwords between, we understand we have to make sure it doesn't get changed in a way. We got to keep those hackers out. We got to keep credit card skimmers off our network. We got to do things. But the availability piece is a huge and equally important piece of the promises we in cybersecurity make to the organization we're part of or work for. And availability is that information will be there to empower the organization. If you think of it this way, if we didn't have the availability piece, our job would actually be fairly easy. But of course, we don't operate in a vacuum of security just for security's sake. We operate to protect the organization's information, to empower the organization to do its job. And if you get down to it, at the end of the day, if we don't do that, if we don't do all three pieces, and the organization ultimately fails, then we won't have a job. So living in some kind of ivory tower and just pontificating down very strict policies to protect, the first two pieces, but starting to impact the other piece, the availability piece, and we'll see examples of that as we go through, that could be detrimental. But our job is to make sure that the data is available to the people who need it, because we're there to empower the organization. Another really important concept in there as well is the idea of the trade-off between convenience and security. Generally speaking, there's an inverse relationship, which means that as you increase one, you decrease the other. So if we increase security mechanisms in some way, and then, so we increase the password policy, we make it more complex for safety. We've increased security, but we've of course made it, less convenient. Now our employees have to remember longer passwords. Maybe they have to change it more often. And while that increases security, it decreases their convenience. And there's always a trade-off of that, but there's also something to be aware of too, because at some point you push that too far. And what'll happen is you think, hey, we're making our password policy stronger and stronger and stronger. So we're getting more and more secure. But then you start walking around the office and you look around and everybody's got their passwords up on a Post-it note because they can't remember 18 digits with alphanumeric and changing every 30 days kind of thing. So everybody in the company has it just inside a drawer or up on their monitor. And so now we've actually really weakened security and not gained what we wanted, right? So we have to balance this thing. Once again, those three things we're trying to do is protect the confidentiality, protect the integrity, but maintain availability. Okay, and this is the trade-off there. Most of you probably came to this program because you're interested in this kind of stuff, either from the I want to beat the hackers or I want to learn all their tricks and outdo them. It's a hot field, of course. There's a lot going on. Every time you turn around, there's a new news story. There are literally million plus jobs, 1.5 million, depending on the stats you believe, but a lot of jobs unfilled in this space. And so we launched this program to help fill some of that gap, obviously. And so the last thing the chapter talks about is some of the challenges, and we're going to expose you to all these throughout the courseware. You know, it's a very rapidly evolving space we're in, and some of the big things that come down to the challenges just come down to the sheer numbers of things. We have so many more people on the internet, so many more servers on the internet, so many more devices on the internet, so many virtual machines now through the cloud, that there's just a bigger and bigger attack space, and there's more and more things that can be attacking us. Excuse me, allergies. So anyway, it's something that we will come back and look at, particularly some of the newer devices that are starting to pop up, smart devices, these Internet of Things as people refer to it, and we'll talk about that a couple different times throughout the program. So then when we finish and move into the next lesson, we take a little look at security roles. Now, we chose to do this at this point for two reasons. One is that the chapter starts with some information on what we call conceptual security roles. And these are important, as you'll see next week when we talk about some of the sort of guidelines that are out there to help us do our job, templates and blueprints, if you will. They're actually called security frameworks, and we have a couple lessons on those next week. But when you look at some of that and you look out there into the field, you'll sometimes see these references to these conceptual roles, like being a data owner or a custodian, or of course, as most people are in an organization, they're just users of the data. And those are important roles to understand, because as you start to think about and look at, putting into place security policy for an organization, and particularly in using some of the guidelines and templates out there, you'll see those phrases. And so it's like, oh, okay, that role has this function within this security plan. And so it's important to be able to understand that and think of those roles from that point of view. But the other part of that lesson is really kind of okay, you've started this program. Let's take a look at what all could be your future. We cover some intermediate or some intro, intermediate, and advanced positions that ultimately are within the broad umbrella of cybersecurity. This program, as you know, for joining it, requires some pre-knowledge, passing an assessment, having some previous courses, having a Network Plus exam, exactly something like that under your belt, and then you can come into our program. And we're trying to not turn you into a support tech or an entry-level computer person. We assume that's been accomplished. We're turning you into a security person, entry level for that field, but that's more of a step up than your sort of average first support job. But then there's, of course, more places to go than that. And there's ways to go even within those different levels. And so I'm not going to go over all that. That's not the point of these lectures. These lectures are meant to supplement and support the material and provide, reinforcement, repetition when it's important concepts. But all the different roles are important for you, I think, really. And it's one of the reasons we wrote it into the coursework so early, was to get you thinking. As you go through this course, you're going to see other references to other roles, other references to some of these roles. You will obviously be learning skills in both sides of things, say the attack side, the defense side. And so one of the reasons I like to put this here is I like to have people sort of think about it as even an exercise on thinking about where you might go. And of course, there's lots of different paths. You get out of this program, you'll have all you need to take, say, Security Plus to add on to your credentials and then get yourself in the door in this field. And then where do you go from there? Well, some of you, like to break things, as the argument is. And so you're going to probably head down the road of the red team type of stuff, the attack side, become a pen tester. Maybe you like to stay hands-on. Maybe you start your own company doing that kind of stuff. So there's a path for entry job, learning, starting your own company, advancing to running your own firm, right? Some of you might decide that you like more of the defense side. So you start off as an admin, you into providing additional defense support, more blue team defend operations, managing critical devices, firewalls, intrusion detections, other things, ultimately moving into being an auditor or a manager of some kind. And of course, some of you really want to go that route. And so whether it's other experiences you have in your, or what you take next is like, I'd like to be the chief information security officer someday for a firm. Well, you're probably going to need to get, make sure you're pretty well versed on, both sides, if you will, of the cybersecurity area. And then as well, you're probably going to need to add leadership course, maybe some management courses, maybe an MBA or something to yourself that down the line as you head down that road, right? So these are the kind of things that by, presenting you with, as you can see, a lot of different options and a lot of different growth potentials and a lot of different possible tracks, given the way tech and even security works. You might work somebody here, do a project here, start your own company for a while, go back, get recruited away. Who knows how your path may go, but there's a lot of different options. So I won't spend a lot of time on that because it's a pretty easy read. And I think most people, can understand the high level of that, and then they'll do their own research as part of the exercise to kind of think ahead. And that way, I think it's a good exercise to do now. And then as you get near the end of the program, you might think, remember, put this one back here. Okay, don't just, okay, I knocked it out. Practice exercise, whatever, here you go, I got my credit in the system, I'm moving on. But no, sort of put it aside somewhere, think about it, because as you get through the rest of the program, it would be interesting to go back and look at it from the point of view of, oh wow, I was right all along, right? I think I want to go this way, and everything I liked about the program was that way, and reinforced it, and that's where I'm going. Great, good for you. I'm never that good. I've wanted to be so many things in my life, and I have had multiple different careers, and the one common factor has thankfully been computing and technology since I got into them as a kid, but done a lot of different things, let's just say, and I never, to this day, don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So if I had done this exercise in a sense and then decided, and so many months later, I would probably have changed my mind, and some of you may as well. You may think you want to go a certain way, but then as the program exposes you to different things, you just become fascinated with the way to configure X or the way to do Y, or you want to learn more about attacks when you thought so we'll see how that plays out. So that is lesson 2. Lesson 3, if we've set some basic terminology and kind of defined what it is in the broad sense we're doing, and then we talked about some of the roles that we can do once we leave this program and in the future. Then lesson 2 is, okay, so we understand we're defending. So what are we defending against, right? So it's your first exposure, even though some of these things will be, you've read about them in the papers, if nothing else. If you have interest, you may have done some other classes or other stuff outside. But there's all these different attacks. And then what we like to call is the phrase threat actors, which is a broad term to cover all the different players out there that can basically take advantage of a potential vulnerability to cause a threat. Okay, so I like to break up the attacks into 2 kind of categories. There are attacks that have been around since, well, some argue that they've been around longer, and in some cases that's true, kind of standard attacks. And then there's sort of some of these newer ones, and in some cases there's a little hybrid going on there, that it's a, the newer stuff has allowed the, morphing or evolving of an older attack. But what do I mean by sort of standard and newer attacks? Well, some examples. Since there has been, a system on the internet, the DARPANET, before that, the ARPANET, the original DARPA organization funded the predecessor to the internet. Since there's been computers online, there's been pretty much shortly thereafter people trying to see what they can do. In the earliest days of most of those being researchers and engineers, they were playing and learning, and there wasn't really any maliciousness to it, since there were so few people, it would have been fairly easy to track too. But of course, people have attempted to log into systems, guess somebody's password. If you can get that prompt to come up from a remote machine, well, let's see, user password, admin password, whatever. I mean, people have been trying to do, and of course, we have over the years seen that become more automated, and so we've got that kind of attacks. I mean, malware and viruses have been around almost as long as there have been computers. Somebody decided, hey, I can make a program that's not a cool game or something useful, and I can be a jerk about it and ruin people's stuff. And of course, that's not really what people are into as much anymore, except for the point of view that as long as there's money involved, as we're going to see, that's kind of the main motivator of driving the threat actors of today for the most part. And you could argue that, we call an entire class of malware a Trojan, and that goes all the way back to at least the story or / myth. There's some debate about that, but that's neither here nor there, of the Trojan horse, right? How they left the fake horse out and said, okay, you guys won, we're going home. And then pretended to go home, and they had actually slipped in some soldiers so that after the folks partied all night and went to sleep, the gates got swung open from the inside, right? And then the attackers came in and sacked the city. So we have, that kind of a concept that people have done kind of tricky things to get inside of our castles, or, accomplish something. And those things now happen digitally. So we have malware, we have attacks, scans and probes, and all these kind of things that have been around since the computers. Now, some of these have evolved. That classic model of somebody trying to just log in, seeing if they can get into an account, or trying different combinations, of course, evolved from being a manual process to even years ago to being automated. That's what computers can do, right? That's a perfect task for them. Here, Mr. Computer, I'm going to write you a little script, or I'm going to use the tools we're going to learn, and I'm going to let you pound away on that machine with a bunch of passwords and usernames and see if we can get in, right? And but that's evolved to even a newer form today, in the more modern. As the number of devices on the net has just exploded, we now are seeing that a common trick of the threat actors out there is to not directly attack anything, or not sort of maybe their prime target, because obviously, we have gotten better at things in response, and it's a sort of a Cold War situation between the black hats and the white hats, as they try new tricks to get in, and we try new defenses to keep them out, and it's just never ending game. And so the attackers have been attacking to get into accounts, and they still do it to this day. And you'll even still see it happen in an old school model where you look in your logs and you just see all these failure attempts, and we'll cover logs later. And you see all these failure attempts, and they're all coming from the same IP address. And they're using different names, they're going down the alphabet: Abel, Amy, Brenda, Bob, on we go, right? And you're like, oh, okay, well, let's add this to our firewall block list, and let's block this Yahoo who's trying to pound away. And that was sort of the, older school model. Somebody either sitting on a computer just doing it by hand, or running a program to do this. Now, though, you'll see, if you're watching logs, that same kind of thing happen, but every attempt is on a different IP, because it's become real popular for threat actors to, instead of directly going after their goal, they go get themselves a lot of resources. They take over other people's computers, servers, or workstations that are insecurely configured, not patched, etc. They send out all this spam. They do all this stuff, to attempt to try to get as many. Once they infect one, they'll look for the next one. And each of those then sort of calls home to some command and control server. And they've built what we refer to as a botnet, or a zombie net. So they now have a network of hundreds, sometimes thousands, hundreds of thousands of devices that they have control of, at least in one form or fashion. And then with those, they can then stage other attacks. And that's how we start to get into the newer attacks, because there are just so many possibilities now, and so many things that we couldn't even do years ago. But in this context now, what they've done is they take that whole network and they say, okay, I want to break into that machine over there, but I want this zombie machine to take an attempt, and this zombie machine to take an attempt, and this zombie machine to take an attempt. And then why do they do that? Well, because I don't see the pattern. I can't see one IP that's obvious that I can block. They're not trying multiple login attempts on the same account, so I can't block that. It's not 3 failed logins, so I don't lock the account. It's not coming from the same IP, so I can't block it. There's no pattern to it. If they're smart about how they stage their attack, they bounce it around all over the world. And only because maybe if you're looking at your logs, analyzing stuff at 3 o'clock in the morning when there's no other traffic normally, let's just say hypothetically on this site, and you're looking, and then you can see the pattern again: Amy, Abel, Bill, Bob, Sue, down the alphabetical list. But every single request is from a different IP. So how do we defend against that? Or what if they don't want to try to log in, they want to use all of those zombie bots, and they just want to bomb you with information and take you offline? denial of service type attack. So we got a whole bunch of attacks and new ones because we have so many new devices. The concept of what's called the Internet of Things, which is basically a bunch of computing and networking capabilities embedded into now consumer devices, from thermostats to refrigerators to coffee machines to water filters to on and on and on. As more and more of these things get out there, they are becoming a huge new attack vector and a huge new threat that we have to be aware of. One of the most interesting things I read this spring was an article about how a major Southeast Asia casino had their list of their top, what they call their whales, their top list of gamblers that they would get a penthouse suite in a private room and spend just umpteen sums of money. That list was stolen from them. And how was that done? Well, they have a really fancy schmancy aquarium, saltwater aquarium, hundreds of, thousands of gallons in their entry lobby. And that aquarium has to have me everything else. If you've ever seen that, of course, or ever owned a fish, you got to maintain the balance, right? So you don't kill everything off, especially with the exotic fish. So they had a third-party company who was managing that aquarium for them on a contract basis, and they had brought in, and I'm not